January 1944. The bitter wind cuts across the open fields of upstate New York. A long, rattling train grinds to a halt, its steel wheels echoing against the frozen tracks. Inside, German soldiers, weary and bewildered, press against the barred windows, eyes wide with suspicion. Smoke from the train's engine drifts into their nostrils, mixing with the faint scent of metal and human fatigue. As they step onto the snowy platform, the first thing that strikes them is silence. An eerie calm that contrasts sharply with the constant thunder of artillery back in Europe. Rows of neatly painted wooden barracks stretch ahead, smoke curling from chimneys, and American officers, faces calm and polite, welcome them. Hot meals are already on tables, and a small orchestra plays a cheerful tune in the distance. Confusion, disbelief, and awe flash across the POWs' faces. The soldiers had expected hardship. They had not expected comfort. By late 1943, World War II had engulfed much of Europe and North Africa. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, held vast territories, but the tide was slowly turning. The Allies, led by the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, were beginning to consolidate victories. In the European theater, German forces were stretched thin, fighting on multiple fronts from the frozen steppes of Russia to the beaches of Normandy. Thousands of German soldiers, weary from battles across North Africa and Europe, were being captured in increasing numbers. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States had undergone a remarkable transformation. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, America mobilized its industrial might, rapidly building aircraft, tanks, and ships to support the Allied war effort. But alongside military production, attention turned to a less visible, yet equally complex challenge: the humane and strategic management of enemy, prisoners of war. American military doctrine and legal obligations were guided by the 1929 Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. According to these regulations, captured soldiers were to be treated humanely, provided adequate food, shelter, medical care, and opportunities for work within the camp. Yet the scale of operations in the United States posed new logistical questions. How would tens of thousands of captured German soldiers be housed, fed, and managed on a continent thousands of miles from the battlefields? The answer lay in a combination of practicality and policy. The U.S. Army established dozens of POW camps across rural and semi-urban areas, from the deserts of Arizona to the snow-laden forests of New York. The choice of locations was strategic. Camps were placed far from the front lines to minimize escape risks, close to labor sources to support agriculture and infrastructure, and in regions where local communities could assist with resources. These camps, often former National Guard facilities or newly built complexes, featured rows of wooden barracks, well-drained pathways, and separate facilities for dining, recreation, and medical care. By the winter of 1944, the first large groups of German prisoners were transported across the Atlantic under strict supervision. Convoys of ships, heavily guarded and insulated against the winter cold, carried these soldiers, men who had endured battles in the deserts of Africa or the frozen plains of Eastern Europe. The prisoners' journey was long and tense. Rumors of harsh American treatment had preceded them. Many expected the brutal conditions they had experienced at Soviet or British hands: overcrowded cages, starvation rations, and the threat of summary punishment. But what awaited them was profoundly different. Upon arrival, the POWs were met not by fearsome guards or empty compounds, but by orderly camps, where warmth, food, and surprising amenities were the standard. Officers greeted them with formal politeness. Barracks were heated, mess halls served hot meals, and signs of recreation, sports equipment, chessboards, even musical instruments, hinted at a life far removed from the trenches they had left behind. The contrast was immediate, palpable, and disorienting. For soldiers hardened by years of combat and deprivation, the orderly calm of the American camps felt almost surreal. Their initial shock would soon unfold into deeper cultural and psychological tensions that would define the rest of their internment. This moment, the arrival and first impressions of the German POWs, sets the stage for understanding not only the human story but also the larger military and moral calculations behind America's secret approach to POW management. The American military approach to POW management was meticulous, reflecting both practical necessity and legal obligation. Camps were designed not as prisons in the traditional sense, but as self-contained communities capable of sustaining thousands of men. Each camp included rows of wooden barracks insulated against harsh winters, well-maintained mess halls, latrines, medical facilities, and recreational spaces. The layout itself was a study in order and efficiency. Barracks were spaced to prevent overcrowding. Pathways were cleared for easy patrols. And fences, usually barbed wire with guard towers, were strategically placed to allow surveillance without oppressive proximity. Food was one of the most striking differences for the German soldiers. Whereas frontline rations in Europe were often meager, inconsistent, or spoiled, the American camps offered meals that were abundant, balanced, and, in many cases, surprisingly fresh. POWs received bread, meat, potatoes, and vegetables prepared in hygienic kitchens. Special provisions, such as coffee, fruit preserves, and even chocolate, were included whenever possible. The quality and consistency of food were not simply acts of generosity. They were deliberate measures to maintain order, reduce escape attempts, and comply with international law. For men accustomed to near starvation on the Eastern Front, the meals appeared almost indulgent. Labor was another element of the American POW system, but it was carefully controlled. Prisoners were assigned to work in agriculture, forestry, or light industry, often assisting local communities suffering labor shortages due to the war. Payment for work was nominal, usually in the form of small credits or tokens that could be exchanged for items in the camp canteen. For many German soldiers, this structured activity was unfamiliar. The monotony of work, combined with humane conditions, fostered a sense of security, even if it was tinged with frustration at their captivity. Recreation played a similarly important role. Camps were equipped with sports fields, gyms, and spaces for chess, music, and other pastimes. Some larger camps organized theatrical performances, band concerts, and newspaper publications entirely run by the POWs themselves. The American administration encouraged these activities not only to maintain morale, but also to instill discipline and reduce the mental strain of confinement. Letters sent back to Germany would later describe these scenes as almost unbelievable, a level of comfort that contrasted sharply with what was being endured by civilians. Back home, or soldiers on the front lines, medical care followed the same principle. Each camp had a fully staffed infirmary, often with doctors and nurses trained in both emergency and preventive care. Illnesses that might have been fatal on European battlefields, respiratory infections, malnutrition, or wounds were treated promptly. Vaccinations, regular inspections, and attention to hygiene reduced disease outbreaks, ensuring that prisoners remained healthy enough to continue work and recreation. Yet the system was not without tension. German POWs, steeped in a military culture that emphasized discipline, toughness, and stoicism, were unsettled by the lack of overt hardship. Letters, diaries, and official reports reveal a mix of disbelief, suspicion, and quiet resentment. Some soldiers feared propaganda traps. Others wrestled with shame at being provided comforts denied to their own comrades still fighting in Europe. These cultural and psychological dissonances would later shape the prisoners' behavior and the narratives they recounted after the war. By the time the German POWs fully settled into their American camps, the foundations of an unusual social experiment had been laid, a system where humanity, strategy, and law intersected to produce a standard of treatment that, to its recipients, seemed almost unimaginable. This understanding of camp life sets the stage for exploring multiple perspectives, human, tactical, technological, and moral, that defined the POW experience in America. Human perspective. For the German soldiers, arrival at the American camps was a psychological shock. Men hardened by years of combat, accustomed to hunger and fear, suddenly found themselves in heated barracks with clean beds and plentiful food. Letters later recovered from these POWs describe disbelief at the availability of hot meals, coffee, and even desserts. Some soldiers wandered the grounds in silent astonishment, unable to reconcile the comforts around them with the brutality of the war they had left behind. The disparity between expectation and reality created a mixture of relief, guilt, and confusion, highlighting the complex human reactions to care offered by an enemy. Leadership perspective. American camp administrators faced a delicate balancing act. They had to ensure security and compliance with military objectives while maintaining humane treatment. Officers such as Colonel Paul W.R. Compton, overseeing camps in the Midwest, emphasized discipline, organization, and fairness. Detailed schedules, strict reporting, and well-defined work assignments allowed the camps to function smoothly. Leadership's commitment to the Geneva Convention was not just moral, it was tactical. Humane treatment reduced escape attempts, minimized unrest, and projected a positive image internationally. The careful orchestration of order and comfort reflected a sophisticated understanding of leadership under extraordinary circumstances. Tactical, Sitchin's military perspective. From a military standpoint, the American approach to POW management was pragmatic. Housing thousands of captured soldiers in secure camps freed frontline troops for combat duties. Utilizing POW labor in agriculture, forestry, and infrastructure addressed domestic labor shortages caused by mobilization. This strategic deployment was effective because the prisoners were relatively content, reducing rebellion and maximizing productivity. Additionally, the visibility of well-run camps demonstrated to the international community that the United States adhered to the Geneva Convention, strengthening diplomatic credibility and undermining Axis propaganda about Allied brutality. Technological, WWII. Infrastructure perspective. The camps themselves were technological feats of organization. Each barrack was insulated for harsh winters, equipped with heating stoves, and arranged for optimal surveillance. Mess halls were designed to feed hundreds efficiently. Kitchens stocked with adequate supplies, and sanitation systems were implemented to prevent disease outbreaks. Recreational facilities, sports fields, music halls, and libraries required careful planning and resources. These elements combined to create an environment that, while secured, appeared almost luxurious to the incoming POWs. The thoughtful integration of architecture, logistics, and resources made these camps models of wartime infrastructure. Psychological, cultural perspective. The camps also functioned as unintentional laboratories in cultural and psychological adjustment. German POWs confronted values and norms markedly different from those of Nazi Germany. Respectful treatment by American guards, access to education and recreation, and freedom of movement within the camp boundaries challenged deeply ingrained beliefs about authority, power, and human hierarchy. Some prisoners embraced the amenities and camaraderie. Others resisted, suspicious of hidden motives. This cultural confrontation was a subtle but powerful element of captivity, shaping prisoners' attitudes toward their captors and leaving lasting impressions that would be reflected in post-war memoirs and interviews. Enemy propaganda perspective. The treatment of German POWs in American camps did not go unnoticed by the Nazi regime. Propaganda in Germany often painted Allied forces as brutal and untrustworthy, expecting prisoners to suffer harshly. Reports of comfortable conditions, hot meals, and recreation facilities contradicted these narratives. Some prisoners, aware of the propaganda back home, feared their treatment was a calculated psychological trap. Letters smuggled home revealed confusion and suspicion. Soldiers worried that enjoying the amenities might mark them as traitors in the eyes of their superiors. Yet this disparity also undermined Nazi messaging, subtly illustrating the contrast between the claims of the regime and the reality of Allied conduct. Moral satisfaction. Ethical perspective. From a moral standpoint, the American approach demonstrated a commitment to human dignity even amidst global conflict. Adherence to the Geneva Convention was not merely bureaucratic, it was a conscious choice to respect the enemy's humanity. Providing proper food, shelter, healthcare, and recreation reflected an ethical framework uncommon in wartime. This moral high ground had consequences beyond the camps. It influenced post-war reconciliation and set standards for the treatment of prisoners in future conflicts. The ethical clarity of the policy created a tension for POWs who had internalized harsh discipline and dehumanization. For them, the experience of being treated with respect could be as unsettling as it was comforting. Psychological impact. Adaptation perspective. The combination of comfort, routine, and safety led to surprising psychological effects. Many POWs, initially suspicious, gradually adapted to camp life. Diaries and interviews reveal men learning to read, play instruments, or participate in organized sports. These activities occupied their minds, reduced stress, and cultivated a sense of normalcy. However, adaptation was complicated by guilt and dissonance. Soldiers struggled with the knowledge that comrades at the front endured hardship and death while they lived in relative comfort. This tension shaped behavior. Some sought to emulate discipline and productivity, while others resisted, maintaining a stoic detachment from camp life. Historical significance. Perspective. The American POW camp system holds a unique place in World War II history. It demonstrated that military necessity and humane treatment could coexist. Unlike Soviet or even some British camps, where deprivation and brutality were common, U.S. camps showcased the logistical, moral, and strategic advantages of treating prisoners well. This model influenced later military policies worldwide, highlighting the long-term value of ethical warfare. Moreover, it left a legacy in the post-war narratives of both American administrators and German veterans. Memoirs consistently emphasize the unexpected kindness, organization, and relative luxury of the camps, ensuring that the story endures as a remarkable footnote in wartime history. Cultural, social perspective. Finally, the camps created a space for cultural exchange, however subtle. German POWs interacted with American guards, local communities, and occasionally with civilians involved in labor programs. These encounters exposed them to American customs, food, and language, leaving lasting impressions. Some prisoners took lessons in English, played baseball with guards, or exchanged small gifts with nearby farmers. While not intended as formal diplomacy, these interactions humanized both sides, fostering mutual understanding. For many POWs, these experiences became some of the most memorable of the war. Not the battles they fought, but the moments of unexpected connection in the heart of enemy territory. Spring 1944. Snow had melted from the New York fields, leaving muddy paths that glistened under a weak sun. German prisoners, still cautious, began to explore the camps beyond the barracks. The first shock came in the mess halls. Soldiers accustomed to rationed bread and watery soups were presented with steaming trays of meat, potatoes, and fresh vegetables. Coffee, strong and aromatic, was available at every meal. Desserts, cakes, fruit preserves, chocolate were served on occasion. One prisoner, writing in a clandestine journal, described the scene as unbelievable, almost like a dream of home. Beyond the food, leisure facilities magnified the dissonance. Athletic fields buzzed with activity. Soccer matches, volleyball games, and baseball sessions organized by the POWs themselves. Some camps offered musical instruments and small orchestras, with prisoners performing for both fellow inmates and American officers. The presence of libraries, reading rooms, and newspapers produced by the prisoners under camp supervision further emphasized the unusual level of autonomy and comfort. Men who had survived bombardments and frostbite were now pacing neatly kept lawns, debating strategy in chess matches rather than on battlefields. The cultural contrast extended to personal interactions. Guards, trained to be firm, yet respectful, engaged with POWs without overt hostility. Officers addressed prisoners formally but politely, often asking for cooperation rather than demanding obedience. Some prisoners were surprised to find themselves in a system where compliance was guided by rules, not fear. Letters sent to families in Germany reflect the cognitive dissonance. Fear of being seen as collaborators mingled with relief and gratitude for warmth, nourishment, and relative safety. Yet the initial shock slowly gave way to tension. Not all POWs embraced the amenities. Groups of officers and ideologically steadfast soldiers resisted, wary of perceived propaganda traps. They questioned whether these comforts were a tool to weaken discipline, enforce American ideology, or extract cooperation. Reports show that some prisoners refused to participate in work or leisure programs, maintaining a strict stoicism reminiscent of frontline military life. These quiet resistances created subtle divisions within the camps, between those adapting to comfort and those clinging to wartime austerity and ideology. Several documented incidents highlight this clash. In Camp Aliceville, Alabama, a group of German POWs reportedly staged a minor protest when asked to participate in recreational sports, claiming it was beneath them. At Camp Papago Park, Arizona, letters intercepted by American intelligence revealed both astonishment and disbelief at the quality of camp food, furniture, and facilities. These moments were not violent or extreme, but they illustrate the psychological tension inherent in the experience. Prisoners were forced to reconcile their soldierly identity with the reality of humane captivity. The Americans monitored these reactions carefully. Commanders like Colonel Wendell Fertig and others overseeing the camps understood that the combination of comfort and oversight produced discipline without cruelty. The psychological equilibrium achieved in the camps, enough freedom to satisfy personal dignity, but enough structure to prevent disorder, was a delicate but deliberate balance. By mid-1944, the German POWs were living in a paradoxical reality. They were captives, yet well-fed, prisoners, yet free to recreate, defeated soldiers, yet treated with respect. For many, this was both liberating and disorienting. The shock of the camp's amenities had reached its apex, setting the stage for the later consequences. Letters home, cultural reflections, and the eventual historical assessment of America's POW strategy. The narrative tension is now at its peak, where personal astonishment, moral conflict, and institutional planning converge, leading naturally into the next phase, where the consequences of this unusual captivity become evident. By late summer 1944, German POWs had spent months acclimating to camp life. Yet moments of astonishment continued to punctuate their daily routines. In Camp Hereford, Texas, a visiting Red Cross inspection revealed prisoners attending classes in English and mathematics, working in small workshops, and participating in organized musical performances. Observers noted the contrast between these activities and the devastation many prisoners had witnessed back in Europe. For men who had endured the freezing Russian winters or the deserts of North Africa, this structured, almost serene environment seemed unreal. The camps also became stages for cultural clashes and moral dilemmas. Letters intercepted by American intelligence often revealed a mix of awe and unease. One soldier wrote home, "We are prisoners, yet they treat us better than our own men in the field. It is confusing. almost shameful to enjoy it. Such reflections were common. While some POWs embraced the amenities, others maintained strict discipline and minimal engagement, wary of appearing weak or compromising their honor. This divide highlighted a critical turning point: the prisoners' internal struggle between survival and pride, adaptation and resistance. Work assignments intensified these tensions. Camps relied on POW labor to sustain agriculture, harvest crops, and support local infrastructure. While assignments were generally safe, organized, and compensated with small credits, they offered a stark reminder of captivity. Yet, many prisoners reported that this work, coupled with leisure opportunities, offered purpose and a sense of routine absent in the chaos of war. Letters home frequently noted the irony. Men who had fought fiercely in Europe were now harvesting American crops under the watchful eyes of former enemies. Several incidents further underscore the intensity of the period. In Camp Papago Park, Arizona, a group of prisoners attempted a minor escape, motivated not by despair but curiosity and adventure. They were quickly recaptured, but reports emphasized the disparity between expectation and reality. There was no violence, no severe punishment, merely a return to structured routines. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, a similar minor disturbance occurred when prisoners organized a football match without prior permission, prompting intervention by officers. Such events, though minor, illustrated the friction between autonomy and authority, as well as the complex psychology of men adjusting to unexpected circumstances. The American command closely observed these behaviors, using them to refine camp policy. Officers understood that the combination of comfort, recreation, and monitored freedom created a unique equilibrium. By allowing limited autonomy while maintaining security, they minimized unrest and escape attempts. Reports from camps consistently noted improved morale, cooperation in labor programs, and reduced disciplinary issues among prisoners who were treated humanely. This careful calibration of control and liberty became the defining feature of America's POW strategy. The broader implications of these turning points were not lost on historians. German soldiers carried their experiences back into personal narratives and post-war memoirs, often emphasizing the surreal nature of their captivity. Many described the initial shock of warm beds, abundant meals, and polite officers as a pivotal moment, reshaping their perception of the enemy. For American administrators, the success of the camps reinforced a wartime principle. Ethical treatment of prisoners could serve both moral and strategic objectives, strengthening international credibility while preserving domestic security. By the end of 1944, the shock experienced by German POWs had transformed into a grudging adaptation. Soldiers learned routines, participated in cultural and recreational activities, and observed the humane framework that structured their lives. The tension between expectation and reality, the essence of the camp's unique experience, had reached its resolution, setting the stage for the aftermath, where we examine the long-term consequences, official reports, and historical significance of these extraordinary POW conditions. By early 1945, the German POW experience in the United States had matured into an unusual blend of captivity and comfort. Records from the War Department indicate that over 400,000 German soldiers had been interned across dozens of camps nationwide, including large installations in New York, Texas, Mississippi, and Alabama. Mortality rates were remarkably low, with disease and malnutrition virtually eliminated through the strict enforcement of hygiene standards, medical care, and consistent food supply. This statistical success underscored the effectiveness of America's approach, contrasting sharply with the far higher casualties reported in Soviet POW camps. The POWs themselves responded in varied ways. Letters, diaries, and post-war interviews reveal a spectrum of reactions. Some soldiers adapted quickly, participating in work programs, athletic events, and cultural activities. These men reported a sense of purpose and structure that alleviated the psychological strain of captivity. Others remained aloof, skeptical of American intentions and adhering rigidly to military discipline, avoiding leisure or recreational engagement. The coexistence of adaptation and resistance highlights the human complexity at the heart of the WWII camps, revealing how culture, ideology, and individual temperament shaped responses to confinement. Labor contributions became a notable outcome of this approach. Prisoners engaged in agriculture, harvesting crops critical to local food supplies, and assisted in infrastructure projects such as road maintenance and forestry. In many rural communities, POW labor alleviated shortages caused by American enlistment, benefiting both local economies and national production. The cooperation achieved, largely without coercion, demonstrated the strategic advantage of humane treatment, reinforcing the link between ethical policy and practical military objectives. American authorities also documented cultural and moral impacts. Interactions between POWs and local communities, supervised recreational activities, and educational programs created environments conducive to mutual understanding. Reports from the U.S. Army noted that German prisoners who had initially expressed suspicion often developed respect for the orderly, humane administration of the camps. Memoirs written decades later frequently highlight astonishment at the abundance and civility experienced, reinforcing the historical significance of these camps not merely as detention centers but as microcosms of wartime ethics. These early assessments laid the groundwork for understanding the broader implications of the American POW system. The shock experienced by the prisoners, initial disbelief giving way to gradual adaptation, was a turning point not only for the men themselves, but also for the military doctrine surrounding the treatment of captives. The foundation had been set for examining the larger consequences, how this experience affected post-war German attitudes, influenced international perceptions, and shaped lessons in military ethics. By the end of World War II, German POWs had spent months, in some cases years, in American camps, leaving a complex legacy. Thousands of letters, diaries, and memoirs detail the psychological, cultural, and moral effects of their captivity. Many soldiers recalled the initial shock of abundant food, heated barracks, and polite treatment, a stark contrast to the deprivation and fear endured on the front lines. This experience reshaped their perception of the enemy, producing a nuanced understanding that challenged the wartime narratives of relentless cruelty. The camps also left an enduring mark on post-war German society. Former POWs recounted their experiences in interviews and memoirs, emphasizing how humane treatment influenced their later attitudes toward reconciliation and peace. For many, the i.e. realization that the Americans had maintained ethical standards even in war fostered a grudging respect and, in some cases, admiration. Historians note that these narratives contributed to a broader understanding of wartime ethics, challenging assumptions that all conflict is marked by brutality and revenge. From a military and strategic perspective, the American approach proved remarkably effective. By combining security with humane treatment, the U.S. minimized escape attempts, maintained order, and harnessed prisoner labor for practical purposes. Reports from the War Department highlight a striking fact. While several thousand minor incidents occurred, violent confrontations were rare, and overall morale among prisoners was higher than in comparable Allied or Axis camps. The system demonstrated that ethical adherence to international law could serve both humanitarian and operational goals, establishing a precedent for future conflicts. American reputation internationally benefited as well. Neutral observers, including representatives of the International Red Cross, praised the camps for their organization, cleanliness, and adherence to the Geneva Convention. News reports circulated among Allied and neutral nations underscored the contrast with conditions in Axis-held territories, enhancing the United States' moral and diplomatic standing. These documented practices also became a reference point for post-war reconstruction, humanitarian policy, and military planning. Finally, the legacy of the camps extended to the POWs' reintegration into post-war life. Many German soldiers who survived captivity carried forward lessons in adaptation, discipline, and human decency. Anecdotal accounts note that former POWs retained a sense of cautious respect for American culture, military organization, and fairness, despite the circumstances of their detention. These human stories, combined with statistical evidence and official reports, underscore the long-term significance of America's POW policy, a strategy that balanced security, ethics, and practical advantage, leaving a lasting imprint on individuals and history alike. The culmination of these outcomes sets the stage for reflection, a calm, philosophical examination of what this extraordinary chapter in POW history tells us about humanity, warfare, and the moral choices possible even in the midst of global conflict. In the quiet of an American winter camp, far from the smoke and rubble of European battlefields, a profound lesson unfolded. German POWs, hardened by years of combat and deprivation, found themselves confronted with unexpected kindness, structure, and comfort. Heated barracks, hot meals, and spaces for work and recreation were not mere conveniences, they were deliberate choices, reflecting a wartime philosophy that even enemies deserved dignity. This episode challenges conventional notions of war. It reminds us that conflict is not solely measured in victories or casualties, but also in the moral decisions made under pressure. By adhering to the Geneva Convention and integrating ethics with strategy, the United States demonstrated that humane treatment could coexist with security and military necessity. The POW's astonishment, initial disbelief transforming into adaptation, reveals the human capacity to respond to care, even from those considered adversaries. Decades later, the story of these camps resonates as more than a historical curiosity. It is a testament to the power of empathy, discipline, and foresight amidst chaos. The experiences of men who once faced each other across battle lines became a mirror reflecting choices, consequences, and the potential for humanity to persist even in war. In the end, the legacy of these camps is both practical and philosophical. A lesson that the measure of a society in conflict is not only the weapons it wields, but the respect it extends to those it holds in its grasp. And in that respect, even enemies can bear witness to a different kind of strength, one rooted not in fear, but in decency.